They say the most dangerous betrayals do not come from strangers in the dark. They come from the people sitting right across from you at your own dining room table. For years I fed them, I clothed them, and I trusted them with my very life. But while I was pouring my heart into our family, my own flesh and blood was quietly digging my grave. If you walked past my house on a Sunday afternoon, you would have seen the absolute picture of the American dream. The rich smell of a slow roasted pot roast and sweet potato pie always drifted out of my open kitchen windows, carrying down the block. I could see my neighbours slowing their steps as they walked their dogs, casting envious glances toward my wraparound porch. Inside, my home was filled with the booming sounds of laughter, the clinking of iced tea glasses, and the warmth of a family that seemed deeply connected. My name is Yvonne. I am 61 years old, and after spending 3 decades working exhausting double shifts as a nursing administrator, I thought I had finally earned my peace. I was proud of the sanctuary I had built. My home was paid off, my retirement was secure, and my family was always welcome. But looking back now, the warmth of those Sunday dinners was nothing but a heavy, suffocating blanket of lies. I spent my whole life building a sanctuary, never realizing I had handed the keys to the very people plotting to lock me out of it. The devastation did not come from an outsider or a scammer on the telephone. The architect of my financial ruin was my only daughter, Nia. She was the child I carried, the girl whose college tuition I paid for in cash, and the woman I trusted implicitly with my entire world. I gave her everything a mother could possibly give. In return, she smiled to my face while secretly orchestrating a plan to strip me of every dime I owned and force me out of the only home I had left. The signs were there all along, hiding behind her sweet compliments and helpful gestures. But a mother's love is often blind, and by the time I finally opened my eyes, the trap was already snapping shut right under my own roof. My husband passed away 15 years ago, leaving me to navigate a world that suddenly felt too large and entirely too cold. When I lost him, my entire universe narrowed down to just one person: my beautiful daughter, Nia. I made a promise to my late husband and to God that Nia would never feel the financial void of his absence, especially not when it came to her future, so I buried my deep grief in my work. I took on the hardest role I could find, managing a busy and high-stress hospital wing. I worked double shifts back to back, spending night after night, walking those bright, sterile hospital hallways when my body ached for sleep. My feet would swell and my back would throb, but every time I felt like quitting, I pictured my daughter's face. Every extra dollar I earned and every single overtime hour I logged went straight into a savings account with her name on it. I wanted her to have the absolute best in life, and she did. When she was accepted into an Ivy League university, I did not hesitate for a second. I wrote the checks and paid her exorbitant tuition in full in cash, year after year. She graduated without a single penny of student loan debt, stepping into her adult life. Completely free, carried entirely on the back of my exhausting physical labor. I never complained, because seeing her walk across that stage was my greatest joy. I raised her to know the value of hard work. But more importantly, I thought I raised her to know the absolute value of loyalty. In our tightly knit community and in our family, loyalty was everything. I truly believed that the massive sacrifices I made had forged an unbreakable bond between us. I thought we were a team facing the world together. I believed with every fiber of my being that if you pour unconditional love and unwavering support into your child, that same love will automatically become your safety net when you grow old. It never crossed my mind that my lifelong devotion was being weaponized against me. I looked at Nia and saw my proud legacy and my safety. I did not realize I was looking at a stranger who saw me merely as an obstacle to her own greed. Those grueling decades of relentless work did more than just put Nia through a prestigious school. They built a formidable and secure foundation for my own golden years. I am not a boastful woman, but I am fiercely proud of what I managed to build alone with my own two hands. I own a sprawling multi-million-dollar family home in one of the most sought-after and exclusive neighborhoods in the city. The heavy mortgage has been fully paid off for years. It is a stunning property, surrounded by ancient oak trees featuring a wide wraparound porch and enough spacious bedrooms to eventually house the grandchildren I always prayed she would give me. Along with the debt-free house, I meticulously grew a highly robust retirement portfolio. I consulted with financial planners. I made incredibly smart investments and I lived below my means. I did all of this to ensure I would never become a financial burden to Nia in my old age. I wanted to leave her a massive fortune, not a towering stack of medical bills and debt. But my deep desire to protect her became the very weapon she used to destroy my life. 2 years ago, I experienced a minor health scare. It was nothing truly life-threatening, just a sudden fainting spell from exhaustion that landed me in the hospital for a few days of careful observation. But it sharply reminded me of my own fragile mortality. Lying in that quiet hospital bed, I worried obsessively about what would happen if I were ever truly incapacitated. Nia sat right by my side, tightly holding my hand, crying real tears, and telling me how terrified she was to lose me. She looked so young and incredibly vulnerable in that moment. Out of pure blind love and a desperate desire to make things easier for her if the worst ever happened, I made a fatal mistake. As soon as I was discharged, I contacted my attorney and drafted extensive paperwork to give Nia full power of attorney over all my financial and medical affairs. I handed her complete legal control over my private bank accounts, my lucrative retirement funds, and the deed to my home. I told her it was just in case of emergencies, a simple legal precaution, so she would not have to fight through government red tape if I ever got sick again. I handed over the heavy keys to my entire kingdom, completely blind to the terrifying fact that she had been eagerly waiting to lock me in the dungeon. It was a Tuesday morning when the illusion of my perfect life finally began to crack. I was doing some light dusting in the living room, running my cloth over the heavy oak coffee table, when I noticed a white envelope wedged deep between the cushions of the sofa. It must have slipped out of someone's pocket during our Sunday dinner just 2 days prior. I pulled it out, smoothing the crumpled edges, and adjusted my reading glasses. The return address belonged to a major national bank. I opened it expecting to find a generic credit card offer, but my eyes locked onto the bold black lettering at the top of the page. It was a formal notice of approval for a massive second mortgage taken out against my home. My fully paid-off, debt-free home. I stared at the paper for a long time, trying to make sense of the numbers. $500,000. My first instinct was not panic or suspicion, but sheer confusion. I reasoned with myself that it had to be a clerical error, a mix-up at the bank, or perhaps one of those aggressive, predatory scams that target senior citizens in the mail. I even chuckled softly to myself, shaking my head at the absolute absurdity of it all. I walked into the kitchen and poured myself a cup of coffee, fully intending to call the bank's fraud department as soon as they opened. I refused to let my mind wander to dark places. The thought that anyone in my family could be involved was utterly inconceivable. Nia and Marcus had good jobs, and they drove nice cars. Why would they need a mortgage on my house? I convinced myself that someone had stolen my identity. I sat at my kitchen island, tapping my fingernails against the granite countertop, waiting for the clock to strike 9. I was annoyed, but completely unbothered by the reality of the threat. I had spent my life trusting the people around me, and that deep-rooted trust acted like a thick blindfold. I assumed this was just a hurdle, a minor inconvenience to sort out before my afternoon gardening. But as I stared at the bold print on that thick bank stationery, a tiny, uncomfortable knot began to form tight in the pit of my stomach. The envelope had not arrived in my mailbox. It had been physically carried into my living room and stuffed out of sight. The knot in my stomach tightened as my eyes drifted toward the bookshelf in the corner of the living room. Sitting quietly next to a stack of photo albums was a small, discreet pet camera I had purchased a few months earlier. My golden retriever Buster was getting older, and I liked to check on him through an application on my phone when I was out running errands. The camera automatically recorded motion and saved the video clips to a secure cloud storage account. If someone had dropped that envelope on Sunday afternoon, the camera would have caught them sitting on that exact sofa. My hands were perfectly steady as I unlocked my phone and opened the security application. I scrolled back to Sunday evening right around the time I was in the kitchen washing the dinner plates. I tapped the play button on a video file. The screen loaded, and there were Nia and her husband Marcus sitting alone in my living room. They were not talking about the weather or the delicious meal I had just cooked for them. Marcus was grinning broadly, holding a piece of paper in his hand, the same paper I now held. He leaned over and high-fived my daughter, whispering loudly about how easy the bank approval had been. I turned the volume all the way up, pressing the phone tight against my ear. Nia laughed, a cold sound I had never heard from her before. Then she said the words that completely shattered my reality. She said Mom's memory is slipping anyway. By the time she notices, we will have the money in the offshore account and she will be in a care facility. The phone slipped from my grasp and clattered loudly against the kitchen floor. My hands began to tremble violently, shaking so hard I had to grip the edge of the granite counter just to stay standing. The floor felt like it was instantly dropping out from beneath my feet, plunging me into an endless, freezing void. A heavy, suffocating pressure clamped down tightly on my chest, stealing the air straight from my lungs. My beautiful daughter, the child I had sacrificed everything to protect, had just casually discussed locking me away in a nursing home so she could steal my life savings. I dropped to my knees on the cold tile, sobbing silently, as the profound betrayal ripped through my soul. I stayed on the kitchen floor for what felt like hours, paralyzed by the agonizing shock of Nia's words. But the chilling reality of her voice playing on a loop in my head eventually forced me back to my feet. I picked up my phone with trembling hands and forced myself to dig deeper into the saved audio recordings. I needed to know the full extent of the nightmare festering inside my home. I scrolled further back through the timeline, finding another clip from the week prior. This time, Nia and Marcus were not alone. My brother-in-law DeAndre and his wife Tasha were sitting in my living room drinking the expensive wine I had bought for them. DeAndre is my late husband's younger brother. I had always treated him with immense kindness, cooking him meals and lending him money when times were tough. But on the recording, his voice was dripping with venom and resentment. I listened in absolute horror as DeAndre loudly proclaimed that he was owed my house. He told Nia that because his brother had been the one to purchase the property, originally it rightfully belonged to the family bloodline and not to me. He completely ignored the decades I spent paying off the mortgage, working double shifts, while he bounced from job to job. The conspiracy was far more evil than a simple bank fraud. Tasha chimed in excitedly, discussing a doctor she knew who was willing to accept a cash bribe. They were actively plotting to use my recent minor health scare to build a fake medical profile. DeAndre agreed to help Nia secure fraudulent medical documents to formally declare me mentally incompetent to manage my own affairs. In exchange for his help with the legal paperwork and the corrupt doctor, Nia promised DeAndre a 30% cut of my entire estate once I was locked away. They were sitting in the very house I worked my fingers to the bone to keep laughing as they sliced up my life like a pie. The sheer magnitude of their calculated cruelty took my breath away. It was a highly organized, layered conspiracy involving the people I loved most. They were not just stealing my money. They were planning to steal my freedom, my dignity, and the rest of my natural life. The deep, crushing grief I felt slowly began to evaporate, replaced by something entirely new. a cold, terrifying clarity. I sat at that kitchen's island and let the tears dry on my cheeks. Most mothers would have picked up the phone immediately, sobbing and demanding answers from their child. Most women would have shattered into a million pieces, and for a brief moment I almost did. But the profound heartbreak inside my chest did not break me. Instead, it hardened into a thick block of solid ice. The grieving mother, who had sacrificed her youth for her daughter, died right there on the kitchen floor. In her place, a fierce and unyielding protector was born. I realized that crying would not save my home or my freedom. I was in the fight of my life against a pack of wolves wearing the faces of my family. So I wiped my face, squared my shoulders, and decided to play the exact role they had written for me. When Sunday rolled around, I opened my front door with a warm smile, but my eyes were dead. Nia and Marcus walked in carrying a store-bought pie, acting like the perfect, loving children. DeAndre and Tasha followed closely behind, offering fake hugs and hollow compliments. I swallowed the bile rising in my throat. I served the roast beef, but this time I made sure my hands trembled just a little bit as I poured the gravy. When Nia asked me a simple question about my week, I purposely paused, staring blankly at the wall for a few seconds before answering with a confused stutter. I casually mentioned that I had misplaced my car keys twice that morning and complained about feeling unusually tired. I watched them exchange knowing, arrogant glances across my dining room table. They were so blinded by their own greed that they eagerly swallowed the bait. My performance made them sloppy and overconfident. They thought I was rapidly declining, just like their corrupt doctor was going to claim. They had absolutely no idea that behind my vacant stare, my mind was razor-sharp and calculating every single move they made. The very next morning, while Nia was busy at her corporate job, I drove myself across town to a towering glass office building. I did not go to my usual friendly neighborhood attorney. I hired a notoriously ruthless estate lawyer named Robert and a highly skilled forensic accountant. I sat in a sleek leather chair and slid the bank notice, the hidden camera footage, and all my financial documents across his mahogany desk. Robert listened to my story in absolute silence. When I finished, he did not offer me pity. He offered me a tactical war plan. Our first strike was silent and deadly. Behind the scenes, Robert immediately drafted the legal paperwork to completely revoke the power of attorney I had foolishly given to my daughter. We filed it quietly with the state and notified all the legitimate financial institutions under my name. Nia and Marcus were completely unaware. They continued using the old revoked document to initiate massive transfers from my savings into their hidden offshore accounts. By letting them proceed with the transfers using a voided legal document, they were no longer just greedy children taking advantage of a loophole. They were actively committing federal wire fraud. Every single time Marcus clicked the transfer button on his computer, he was adding another count to his future federal indictment. I gave them enough rope to hang themselves, and they greedily took every inch. Meanwhile, the forensic accountant systematically tracked every single dime they had already tried to hide. While they were busy counting their stolen money, Robert helped me take my remaining liquid assets and my massive retirement portfolio and lock them tight inside an irrevocable trust. It was an ironclad financial fortress. Even if Nia somehow managed to convince a corrupt judge that I was mentally unfit, she would never be able to touch a single penny inside that trust. My wealth was completely shielded from her grasping hands. I spent hours sitting in Robert's office, reviewing the heavy stacks of evidence. We documented every fraudulent signature and every illegal transfer. The forensic accountant discovered that Marcus had been using his own struggling business accounts to launder the money he was siphoning from my life savings. They left a massive digital paper trail because they genuinely believed I would never catch them. That arrogance was going to cost them their freedom. I felt a cold sense of satisfaction watching the legal trap being built, brick by brick. The final piece of their vile puzzle fell into my hands late one Thursday afternoon. The mail carrier delivered a thick envelope from the local courthouse to my new private post office box. Because I had forwarded all my mail, the official notice bypassed my home mailbox completely. I sat in my car in the parking lot and ripped it open. It was a formal notification regarding a petition for conservatorship. Attached to the petition was the fraudulent medical evaluation DeAndre had procured from his corrupt doctor friend. I read the disgusting lies printed on official medical letterhead. The doctor claimed I was suffering from advanced cognitive decline, severe memory loss, and unpredictable bouts of paranoia. He stated I was a danger to myself and entirely incapable of managing my own finances or medical care. He had never even met me. I stared at the forged signatures of Nia and DeAndre at the bottom of the petition. They were legally submitting these fabricated documents to a state judge. My lawyer, Robert, had told me to expect this, and he gave me strict instructions. I did not contest the filing. I did not call the courthouse to scream about the lies. I allowed the bureaucratic machinery to slowly process their fraudulent petition. By willingly submitting those fake documents to the court, Nia, Marcus, and DeAndre had just crossed the line from elder abuse into severe perjury and conspiracy to commit fraud against the state. Their criminal fate was completely sealed the moment the court clerk stamped that paper. Now it was time to bring the rats out of the dark and into the light. I picked up my phone and opened the group text message with my family. I typed out a cheerful message inviting Nia, Marcus, DeAndre, and Tasha over for a very special Sunday dinner. I told them my health had been failing and I was finally ready to make some major life changes. I wrote that I wanted to officially sign the deed of the house over to Nia so I would not have to worry about the heavy upkeep anymore. The responses poured in immediately. They were ecstatic. Nia sent back messages telling me how much she loved me and how this was the smartest decision for my future. DeAndre texted that he was proud of me for keeping the house in the family. They were practically salivating at the thought of finally getting their hands on my multi-million-dollar property. I prepared my famous pot roast, the exact same meal I had cooked on the day I discovered their betrayal. I set the grand dining room table with my finest china and polished the good silver. They thought they were coming over for a celebration to collect their grand prize. They had no idea they were walking directly into an ambush. They arrived exactly at 4 o'clock. Nia walked through the front door first, holding a thick leather portfolio. Marcus was right behind her, wearing a smug grin that made my stomach turn. DeAndre and Tasha followed, acting overly sweet and asking how I was feeling. I smiled politely and led them to the dining room. The table was set beautifully, with the roast steaming in the center, but nobody was looking at the food. They were looking at the head of the table where I usually sat. Nia did not even wait for everyone to pull out their chairs. Before she placed her leather portfolio right on top of my fine lace tablecloth. She unzipped it and pulled out a stack of legal documents and a heavy silver pen. She spoke in that sickeningly sweet baby voice she had been using lately. She said she had all the paperwork ready to transfer the deed, so I could finally rest and not worry about a thing. DeAndre nodded eagerly, rubbing his hands together. I looked at the four of them, taking one final mental photograph of the family I thought I knew. Then I reached under the table and pulled out 4 thick manila folders, placing one in front of each of them. Nia looked confused. She asked what they were. I told her they were my new recipes. But when she opened the folder, her face drained of all color. Inside the folders, I had placed printed transcripts of their conversations from the hidden living room camera. I included high-resolution photographs of Marcus transferring my money into his offshore accounts. Right on top was the legally stamped document proving my power of attorney had been fully revoked weeks ago, along with the official bank notices, stating that all of their fraudulent transfers had been flagged as federal wire fraud. I sat perfectly still, watching the horrifying realization wash over my daughter's face. Her hands began to shake violently. She dropped the silver pen, and it clattered loudly against the china plates. DeAndre flipped through his folder and choked on his breath when he saw the printed copies of his fake medical evaluation highlighted in bright red ink. The smug grins completely vanished from their faces, replaced by absolute terror. They looked up at me, but the frail, confused old woman they expected was gone. Nia tried to speak, but the words caught in her throat. She stammered out a pathetic lie, claiming it was all a huge misunderstanding. Marcus jumped up from his chair, his face red with rage and panic, yelling that I had no right to spy on them in my own home. I did not raise my voice. I simply told him to sit down before he made things worse for himself. DeAndre immediately turned on Nia, screaming that she had dragged him into this mess and that he had nothing to do with the money. The loyalty among thieves dissolved in seconds, right in front of my eyes. Before their frantic arguing could escalate, the loud chime of my front doorbell echoed through the house. I did not move to answer it, because my front door was already unlocked. Heavy footsteps filled the hallway, and my lawyer Robert walked into the dining room. He was not alone. 2 uniformed police officers and a plainclothes detective stepped into the room, completely surrounding the table. The silence that fell over the room was deafening. Robert calmly unbuttoned his suit jacket and handed a massive stack of official legal papers directly to Nia and Marcus. He announced in a clear, firm voice that they were being formally served for elder abuse, financial exploitation, and multiple counts of federal wire fraud. The detective stepped forward and informed Marcus that his business accounts had been completely frozen by a federal judge that morning. Every single penny he thought he had successfully laundered was locked away and seized as criminal evidence. Marcus collapsed back into his chair, putting his head between his hands and sobbing loudly. Then Robert turned his attention to DeAndre and Tasha. He handed them a restraining order legally barring them from my property and warned them that the district attorney was already reviewing their involvement in the fraudulent medical conspiracy. DeAndre looked at me, begging for mercy, crying out that we were family. I looked him dead in the eyes and told him family does not build cages for the people who feed them. The police officers instructed Nia and Marcus to stand up. The metallic click of the handcuffs echoing in the dining room was the loudest sound I had ever heard. They were marched out of my front door, right past the envious neighbors, who were now staring in absolute shock. The aftermath was swift and unforgiving. Nia lost her lavish lifestyle, her luxury cars, and her high-paying corporate job. She and Marcus are currently awaiting trial, facing years in a federal penitentiary for the fraud they committed against me. DeAndre and Tasha became outcasts in our community. Their names were ruined, and the heavy legal fees they had to pay to stay out of jail left them completely broke and destitute. I refused to answer their desperate phone calls or read their pleading letters. Once the toxic elements were completely excised from my life, I realized I did not want to live in that massive house anymore. It was filled with ghosts and bitter memories. So I put the property on the market, and it sold within a week for well above the asking price. I took my securely protected fortune and bought a beautiful, sun-drenched condominium right on the beach. Every morning I wake up to the sound of ocean waves and drink my coffee on a balcony overlooking the clear blue water. I reclaimed my peace, my dignity, and my absolute freedom. I am safe and I am finally happy. I learned the hardest lesson a mother can ever learn. Blood may make you related, but loyalty is what truly makes you family. We spend our entire lives pouring everything we have into our children, hoping they will grow up to share our morals and our values. But you must never let your deep love for your children blind you to the harsh reality of who they have chosen to become. You have a fundamental right to the life you built. Protect your peace at all costs and fiercely protect your hard-earned legacy. If my journey resonated with you today, or if you have ever had to protect yourself from the very people closest to you, please take a moment to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. I really want to hear from you, so please leave a comment below, letting me know exactly where you are watching from. Also, tell me how many minutes into the story you realized Nia was the villain all along. Your continued engagement helps me share more powerful stories of truth and survival. Thank you so much for listening to my story.